Ninth Avenue, then turn left onto South Walnut Street.
Growing up, I always knew that my parents were honest and hardworking people, but I still watched them struggle like so many families do in our community. I remember seeing the dread on my mother's face every time I went off to a wrestling meet in high school. We didn't have health insurance, and she always worried that I'd get hurt. Even at 13 years old, I knew that x-rays are expensive. Unfortunately, my family story isn't unique. Struggles like these are the stories of millions of Americans. People are forced to work multiple jobs with the knowledge that if they get injured, they'll have to choose between medical treatment or feeding their families. And it doesn't have to be this way.
Joining us now is congressional candidate for Washington's 5th District, Chris Armitage. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, John.
I entered this race because of the simple question, who do you want to vote for? My answer felt pretty straightforward. Someone honest, working class, someone who's going to fight for real solutions, someone who isn't bought and paid for before they even enter office.
I know that she takes a lot of money from corporations, something you're not going to do, especially from dirty energy corporations. So what has she been for the district over the past few years?
She's voted against the ACA 50 times. Wow. We have rural hospitals up and down this district. They were not turning a profit. They were losing money every single year until the ACA.
My father ran for city council as a 26-year-old and won. Later, he decided to take up a trade, HVAC repair, because he said he actually wanted to fix things. I enlisted in the Air Force when I was 18. Thanks to the military, I was able to earn a Master's of Science in Homeland Security and an undergraduate degree in Criminal Justice while I was stationed at Fairchild Air Force Base. While enlisted, I was provided with top-notch health care. But during my deployments, I had to help my family cover medical bills due to chronic illnesses. I remember thinking how unfair it was that I received quality health care while they were barely able to make ends meet because of things completely outside of their control. I'm proud to be running as a veteran. I served my nation on multiple deployments. I did border security on the Iraq and Kuwait border. I was a base defense operations controller on the border of the Emirates and Oman. My time in the military convinced me of one thing. No person should be required to enlist in the military to have the ability to pursue our nation's founding ideals of life, liberty, and happiness.
Our future's being sold to the highest bidder by people who will not have to face the consequences.
As a community organizer and activist, I've seen the value that can be brought to a community when there's access to a living wage, guaranteed housing, and universal health care. I don't want to vote for someone who believes the right things but has never struggled. I want to vote for someone who's felt the pain of working multiple minimum wage jobs, but still having to strategically decide which bills they're going to miss. We need someone in Congress who will listen to each and every voice and represent all the voters of the 5th District. Corporations have enough representation. I want to represent real people, the people I live and work with, the people I march alongside, people from the local organizations that are driving real change, the people who make up our community. That's why I've committed to running my campaign on individual donations only. Eastern Washington deserves a representative who is not for sale. When elected, I promise to uphold these ideals. I will work every day for you because you're the ones who put me in office, not corporations, not lobbyists. I'll be proud to look every person in this district in the eye, knowing that I'm representing all of us. When I enlisted, I took an oath to serve our nation. Now I take an oath to serve Eastern Washington, because all of us deserve to be represented by one of us.
Hello everyone, I'm here with Chris Armitage running in Washington State's 5th Congressional District. He is challenging a Republican named Cathy McMorrison Rodgers, and he is running a fantastic campaign, and he is poised to be the Democratic nominee. Chris, thank you for coming on the program.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Mike.
So you are running in this very grassroots progressive campaign. You received the endorsements of Brand New Congress, your local Our Revolution chapter. You're a veteran running this dynamic campaign. But I want you to talk about the dynamic of this race, because this is a Republican seat that you're fighting for, and it seems like there's not much interest from other Democrats. You're currently the only one running. So it seems as if you are the presumptive Democratic Party nominee for this seat. But it's not a foregone conclusion because you are a grassroots candidate. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to run and the dynamics of this race?
Sure. And I want to mention, too, we actually got the National Our Revolution endorsement a week or two ago as well.
That's great.
Yeah, we're excited about it. And, it's an interesting race. We have support, like you said, from a lot of non-establishment organizations and the Washington State Progressive Caucus and Blue America and Brand New Congress. But we're also getting some interesting support, despite me being a grassroots candidate, won't take corporate money, all people powered, running unabashedly as a progressive and the first openly LGBT candidate in this race, and a first-time candidate for office. But involved in the activist community. A lot of people are really rallying out here because this district is only +9 red. The thing is, there is not a Democratic establishment in Eastern Washington, in Washington's 5th congressional district. We had a Speaker of the House who represented this district. He served from 1964 to 1994, and then he lost, and then we've had Republican representation for the last 25 years. And that Speaker of the House, the last Democrat to hold this seat, he won a lot of those rural areas. But after his loss, there just wasn't any infrastructure building for Democrats to win. And, one of the things I really communicate to folks out in this district is that I'm not running this race trying to be right, left, up, down. I'm running this race and supporting the policies I support because they're what are going to help people in Eastern Washington the most. In some of our counties, we have 10% unemployment. And while the president brags about national unemployment, in some of our counties, we have a third of the population under the poverty line. In some of our counties, we have 2/3 of students on reduced or free lunch. And so folks are really struggling. Housing costs are getting more expensive. And at the same time, I'm the only person in this race, but that's also because for almost a year, we've been mobilizing. I announced last May and just started showing up at neighborhood council meetings and finding other people who are done with our current representative, who is completely absent from the district, who doesn't support the Equal Rights Amendment, who has voted, many times to restrict people's rights, restrict people's opportunities, voted for the Trump tax cuts and votes with Trump and Lindsey Graham and Steve King and all those folks 95% of the time completely in lockstep. And she's running for her ninth term. People can see that it's not going to cut it. We need a change. We need something better.
Yeah, and in this district, I love that you're not sacrificing your principles, but you aren't necessarily emphasizing the label. You're just saying, I support Medicare for all. Here's how that affects you. And in terms of how that is actually landing in your district, what has the response been to Republican people? Because I've always maintained that I think that policies like Medicare for all and really working class targeted policies, they will resonate with some Republicans. You just have to explain how it has this concrete impact on their lives. So how has that landed just with regard to your district?
Well, rural hospitals across this district were closing down until the ACA came around, and it made them profitable for the first time in a long time. So, that minimal intervention was really important and helpful for a lot of folks out here. And, when I talk about Medicare for all, one of the first things I mention is that I used to have a commander who would tell me the best answer is the right answer, the second best answer is the wrong answer, and the worst answer is no answer. And right now, we're not getting any answers. I meet people across this district, no matter if it's a rural area or a suburban area, and they'll tell me stories about how they were a family of 5 with 3 diabetics sharing one insulin prescription among all 3 of them every single month, rolling those dice, about people who avoid going to the doctor when they get injured because they might not be able to buy food. And even worse, it might be their child who was injured. And they have to ask themselves, am I going to pay for that x-ray just to find out that nothing's wrong and then we don't have grocery money? And so it's affecting people. Like our district is 25% bigger than New Jersey. It's over 10 counties. It covers a lot of area, but this unites us. And when I was active duty Air Force, I had solid, strong, good insurance. Most of my childhood, I was underinsured or uninsured, except for when my dad was working a good union job. And so I remember going off to wrestling practice and knowing that if I got hurt, it would hurt my family financially. That wasn't a good feeling. That's not something a 12-year-old should have to deal with. And in the military, we had our own version of universal single payer. That's what TRICARE is. You have staff, salaried doctors who are wearing the same uniform as you. They're in a base clinic or hospital that's completely run internally on base. There's no billing. There's no billing at all. The administrative costs are way lower. And the doctor doesn't get paid more if they see more patients. Their whole job is to make sure you're healthy. Many times a doctor would just say things like, hey, I think you're good, but why don't you go up to the 3rd floor and get an x-ray, get an MRI, just to be sure. And that's never going to happen in the civilian world. And so when I speak to folks, no matter how conservative or liberal or progressive, it doesn't matter. The idea that nobody should make more money because you're more sick resonates across the board.
Yeah, totally. I mean, propaganda is effective, but only effective to a point, right? I mean, these are lived experiences that we're kind of speaking to. I mean, when you have this insurance vulture that you're arguing on the phone with to pay a bill that they're supposedly supposed to, cover, and you have to argue with them to pick up the tab when you get this gigantic medical bill, I mean, you can't lie about that. You can't explain to us how much we love our private insurance companies. Nobody likes that. So I think that when you really have these types of conversations and you just you push away all that partisan stuff, and you just talk to people, it really does land. So tell us about this race, because you're going up against a well-funded behemoth. So assuming you're able to actually win that primary, what do you think you can do to actually pull off a victory here, which would, I think, be a national upset? It would be a huge news story.
Most years, I'll also say Washington State does a top 2 primary. So as a Democrat, I will be challenging our Republican incumbent in the primary. And most years most years we only have one Democrat make it to the primary period. We don't have a deep bench of people to run out here. And so, 2018 was the first time that in her, 8 terms, my opponent, that she had really been given a run for her money. Literally, we just had, in most years, our candidates only raised about $350,000. Our 2018 candidate raised about $5 million and got this district put on the blue to red or red to blue list, and still ended up losing. Our 2018 candidate was more moderate. Again, I don't even like using those terms, but it was tough to nail down where they actually stood on the issues. Their website didn't have any policy on it, and publicly they did everything they could to avoid taking a stand on things like healthcare or on gun rights or on, a whole different host of issues that people are really concerned about. And it's just my view, and I think a lot of other people's view, that if you don't nail down where you stand, nobody's going to respect you. Right, left, center, it doesn't matter. So we had an expensive loss in 2018, but it forced my opponent to spend a lot of their piggy bank. And so they have less money this time. The Republicans are defending more seats. We're 9 points from winning this district. That's it. It's single-digit red. And we can do it. It just takes a different type of campaign. And this is something that really only one group in politics understands, and it's grassroots candidates. That we need to knock on every door. We need to be willing to talk to purple and red voters, because we as working class candidates, working class people, me as a former first responder and veteran, I have more in common with a Trump supporter who works in a trade than someone who's been in politics for 30 years, 40 years, doesn't know what it's like to make minimum wage, doesn't know what it's like to be uninsured or underinsured, and is probably not going to fight for things like our health care or our civil liberties with anywhere near the tenacity of someone who's actually had those things attacked. To them, it just becomes more of a political bargaining chip. Oh, who donated to my campaign? Okay, I guess I can't defend that group of people, or I can't help make sure that we have good jobs here. And so we're running a good race. We're bringing a lot of folks over, and I know that we can win.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I love that you have that strategy. And a lot of candidates that I talk to, they say that it really is easy to win over voters just by talking to them, because a lot of people who these grassroots campaigns are activating, they've never been contacted by a political campaign throughout their entire life. So they hear from someone who asks what issues affect them, and they think, okay, well, you have my vote. I've never voted because it seems like it doesn't matter, but you're literally asking me what concerns me and you won me over that way. So, I mean, it just is a matter of talking to enough people, and also name recognition is important as well. I think if enough people know that they have an option that's not corporatist, they will respond to that. So, currently at this point in time, in 2020, we're all kind of riding high because Bernie Sanders is the favorite. There's a lot of grassroots candidates throughout the country, and we're kind of, for the first time, at least I am, because I'm a very cynical individual, thinking about what's possible. So let's assume that you win. You make it to Congress, Bernie Sanders is president. We've got the best possible political predicament. In that first year, in 2021, what do you think is going to be your main priorities? And, there's a lot. I always stress that there's like 100 different things that need to be addressed immediately. But if you had to prioritize like 3, just personally, what do you think you'd focus on in Congress?
Healthcare, housing, and jobs, to put it succinctly. In our district in particular, people are getting, we have a healthcare crisis in this country. And like I said earlier, we're having a system that incentivizes corporations to want us sick and to not heal us, it's not tenable. If we had a magic pill that made everyone free from disease, corporations would never, the pharmaceutical company, the health insurance company would never want us to have it. And so we need to make sure that people are able to receive health care and treatment from cradle to grave, and preventative care that's going to save us money long term. So healthcare is number one. It's the number one uniting thing that we're all experiencing, and that's why I support single payer Medicare for all. And housing is another, because across this district, homelessness is becoming unable to get, even with a full-time job, to be able to get an apartment. They're spending 50% of their income on their housing. It's not something that people can continue to live with. It gets very cold in Eastern Washington, and people are going to freeze to death on the streets, just a few miles from where I am right now. And I think, a society's values really are shown by how we treat those most in need, our, disabled populations, marginalized communities, all different folks who are really just being left behind while our government spends trillions of dollars killing hundreds of thousands of people in other places, So that's another one of my priorities. And then jobs. That's why I'm a supporter of the Green New Deal, because we need a federal jobs guarantee. We need to be able to bring jobs to people and make sure that they have a living wage. When people talk about Make America Great Again, well, so that Trump stole that from Reagan. And Reagan was talking about late 50s, early 60s-ish, your Eisenhowers, your JFKs, a period in American history where, for the most part, you could raise a family on a single income, even with a high school education, and where union membership was at 35%. And that's also the period in American history where the lowest earning 90% of Americans held the highest concentration of wealth, the same time that union membership peaked. And so healthcare, housing, and jobs for the people in Eastern Washington, for our community, for our nation, and for our planet. Because that's the thing, it's Congress, it's federal. We're not electing a dictator president, hopefully.
Yeah.
And so as long as we have co-equal branches of government, as long as that's a thing, and hopefully this election makes that happen again, then we need votes in Congress that are going to fight for decisive climate action, that are going to fight for employment, that are going to fight for not just affordable housing, but guaranteed housing as a right, for healthcare as a right. It only happens with Congress. And in 2008, 2010, when President Obama wanted a public option, it seemed, a blue Congress was the reason it didn't happen, because they were corporate. And a lot of folks here in Eastern Washington like to say flip the fifth blue. I don't support that. I don't, because blue and red aren't going to solve our problems. What's going to solve our problems is healthcare as a right, as a human right, housing as a human right, and climate action.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because that was kind of my next question. Because as you talk about, your agenda and what needs to happen, because it is urgent, my question is, how do you respond to the inevitable marginalization from Democratic leadership? Because, assuming we're not able to change leadership and get Barbara Lee as speaker, for example, that'd be an amazing scenario. But assuming it's still Nancy Pelosi and she doesn't want Medicare for all, and she has everyone else who's working with her, on committees who are important to block that from even, coming up. Like, how do you fight the party? And, what would you do if you were threatened with committee assignments being stripped from you if you spoke out, in favor of Medicare for all? How do you fight within the party and affect change while still holding on to power, but trying to have an influence? Like, I think this is a really difficult line that candidates on the left have to walk, because you're in this unique situation. Like, Republicans will never challenge, Republican Party leadership because they're, in lockstep. But when it comes to the Democratic Party, you have the split between centrists and the left. And so they still have these institutional mechanisms, party leadership that is, that can kind of stop you. So how do you fight against that? Like, what's your plan? And this is something that I genuinely don't know if there's a right answer to, but I just like to kind of pick the brains of each of the candidates, because I think that you all have really good answers that make me feel optimistic. So what's your take on this?
When you get elected, that seat doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the people. It belongs to the people who voted for you. And so if elected, when elected, and I'm in Congress and we get that pushback, it doesn't matter what party someone's from. I'm with the people, wherever that puts me on the political spectrum. I'm with taking care of the folks who can't wait for incremental change because they're dying, because every month they're rolling the dice with that insulin sharing. And so they deserve vocal advocates. They deserve people who are going to shout in the halls of Congress, who are going to demand that we take action. Our planet demands it. As they look, as folks look for a middle ground between destroying our planet, destroying our lives, allowing people to die, continuing to invest more money in forever wars, as they try to look for a middle ground between that and just taking care of people, I'm not going to sacrifice our values. I'm not going to sacrifice our morals, because we deserve better. I'm not running to take a seat and then only care about re-election. That it doesn't matter. The people here for too long have had someone who wasn't around at all, and we see it around the country. And if nothing else, at least I can be the voice there that shouts back and calls it out in person and helps bring support for candidates that are going to help fight back. Sarah Smith is our fundraising director. She was a 2018 brand new Congress candidate. She was challenging a Democrat. She was a Democrat primarying a Democrat. And if that's what it takes, that's what it takes, because we're here to fight for the people, not for a party.
Yeah, I love that answer. Go ahead. I interrupted you. Say what you're going to say.
I don't even remember.
Okay. No, the reason why I like to ask that is because I think that a lot of people, I'm trying to bring out that internal Machiavellian political instinct, if it exists, because, I love how AOC explained that, when you get to Congress, there's all of these different voices that immediately get in your ear, and they try to get you to conform. And you can kind of get a sense of which candidates will conform and which ones won't conform. And I think that's super important to kind of ask what their strategy would be. And, you can hear in your answer that there wasn't any sense of, well, I'm going to play along with leadership, because I'll get in there once I get into power, then I can affect change. But that never happens in reality. So it's important that people are committed to the fight when they get elected to Congress, and they bring that organizer mentality. And I can see that with you. You passed that test, and I wouldn't have told you if you didn't pass the test. So congratulations. So it's just, it's nice to see that people are getting elected not just with the right ideas, but a correct strategy, or at least a strategy that we hope will work, that you're not going to roll over and die like Democrats usually do, unfortunately. It's a sad fact of reality, but there's just there's a lot of people who are well-intentioned that don't want to fight. And part of fighting for the people is this acknowledgement explicitly, I think, that you're going to fight party leadership as well, and your own party if need be. So I think that a lot of people who've watched this, if they haven't already heard about you, are already convinced. So tell us what we can do to help you get elected, because I think that if you were representing the 5th Congressional District and you kicked out a Republican, that would be just phenomenal. So what can we do to make that a reality?
Sure. So you can go to armitageforcongress.com. That's ARMITAGEFOR Congress.com, or Act Blue and chip in a few dollars, because we're doing this as an unbought campaign. This is possibly the only race in the country where it is, a progressive versus a Republican, where it's someone ready to fight for the working class, a working class person ready to demand real change against a Republican, and it's in a winnable district. We can win this district again, but it only happens with your help. And if we don't bring the fight, if we don't really do everything we can, then my opponent is also Trump's Washington State fundraising chair. They're one of the most important arms of his West Coast fundraising, and we need to pull her away from that. How about she spend some time here with the people in Eastern Washington trying to explain cutting SNAP benefits while giving multi-trillion-dollar tax cuts to the wealthy? That it only happens if you help us buy yard signs and, hold more public forums. And that helps us all. That helps build a future worth fighting for. That helps build the future that we all want to see, where our grandchildren can go fishing and where nobody has to die because they don't have health care, because they can't afford to live.
Yeah, we'll leave that there. Thank you so much, Chris. We are watching very closely this race. We're rooting for you, and there's, a little over 160 days until the Washington State primary. Is that correct? In fact, tell us the date.
There.
Tell us the date before we leave.
Well, technically it's August 4th. But we do mail-in ballots, and so those get sent out a few weeks prior.
Okay. Well, I'll have links on the bottom of the screen to your website and whatnot, so they can get those details. Thank you so much, Chris.